Hello and welcome to the second in our series of Insider sessions. Today we'll be looking at MIT Media Lab. This is the second one. Last month we held our first one, which was a session where we looked at ICD Stuttgart, an extremely popular session. The idea here is that we have a kind of fly on the wall insight into what exactly is going on in these institutes. We all know about MIT Media Lab, or the name is very well known, but not so many people know exactly what is happening there. MIT Media Lab, of course, is a world-famous research laboratory. It was founded in 1985 and grew out of the architecture machine group. Since its foundation, it has become synonymous with cutting-edge research related to design and technology. Although not limited to architectural research, it has included within its faculty leading architectural voices such as Bill Mitchell and Neri Oxman, and remains part of MIT School of Architecture. So this session will be looking at the research being undertaken in the MIT Media Lab to give you, from the outside, some kind of insight into what exact work is going on. Before I introduce Kent Larson, who will be saying a few words of introduction about the Media Lab in general, about his particular lab, let me say something about tomorrow's session. So tomorrow we have another in our series of AI, neuroscience, and architecture. This is part of the doctoral consortium, where the idea is to have a platform whereby doctoral students, would-be doctoral students, professors, and students from all over the world can share a platform and meet some of the leading figures. And Daniel Bolojan, as many of you will know, is one of those leading figures in the world of AI and architecture. He is responsible for Deep Himmelblau, that was won both the Academy Awards and the Digital Futures Awards, a very advanced deep learning program developed by Corp Himmelblau. He's also a professor at FAU. And also next week, we have a series of other sessions that are coming up. We have our first we have a session in Spanish, which is on the 18th of May in the West, and the 19th of May in China. Can I just quickly go back to the previous slide a second? Tomorrow's session will be a little different because the clocks are changing in the States, and you'll notice that the time in Europe, in Central Europe, and the time in China is different from it has been the previous weeks because of the changes in clocks. We'll have a further change when Europe changes its clocks the 27th of March, but for tomorrow, please note that we'll be starting at a slightly different time in Europe and in China, and but exactly the same time as usual in European Eastern Standard Time. Then after that, we have our session in Spanish this week, and also a second part of our sessions with Chen on the generative game, which is on Saturday. You can sign up for the registration there for the link if you want to do it on Saturday. And also on Saturday, we have our first ever session in Portuguese. This is a landmark for us. We've already have sessions in English, Chinese, Farsi, Arabic, Spanish, and now our first ever session in Portuguese will take place after the main session on next Saturday. All these talks are being uploaded onto our YouTube channel. These are the series that we've been doing on AI, architecture and neuroscience, and also in architecture and philosophy. But all the sessions there, including the workshops, are included on our Digital Futures library and available to be accessed for free for students and architects around the globe. I also want to mention that we are in the process of planning this next summer. We certainly would welcome anyone else, any recruits who would like to help out in becoming part of the Digital Futures team. This is a team made of volunteers. We all give up our time for free for what we believe to be a very good cause. So if you would like to join us, please just send us an email at info@digitalfutures.world. We'd also like to invite you to join our Discord community, and there is a link if you want to do a screen capture that will give you a link to the Discord channel. Today, then, we're having 5 different presentations from PhD students from within the Media Lab. But first of all, I'd like to welcome Kent Larson to say a few words both about the lab as a whole and also about his own particular lab, City Science. Just to say, a few words of introduction about Kent Larson. Kent directs the City Science group in the MIT Media Lab, formerly known as Changing Places. His research focuses on developing urban interventions that enable more entrepreneurial, livable, and high-performance districts in cities. To that end, his projects include advanced simulation and augmented reality for urban design, transformable micro-housing for millennials, mobility on demand systems that create alternatives to private automobiles, and urban living lab deployments in Hamburg, Andorra, Taipei, and Boston. Lars has practiced architecture for 50 years in New York City with design and designs work published in Architectural Record, Progressive Architecture, Global Architecture, the New York Times, and several other places. He is also the author of a book, on Louis Kahn, which was voted one of the top 10 best books in architecture. Louis Kahn, Unbuilt Masterworks, published in 2000. Kent graciously gave me a talk about the Media Lab when I visited many years ago. I'm not quite sure whether he remembers that, but it's great to welcome you here today, Kent. So would you like to share your screen?
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you. Thank you, Neil. Let me show you all a few slides. It's a pleasure to be here. So this is the media. This is MIT. Most people are familiar with MIT. This is the iconic neoclassical building. MIT is quite often either one or two top-ranked school on the planet. We often swap back and forth with Harvard, the little school down the street. This is kind of the new MIT, the Frank Gehry building that houses the AI lab. It's sometimes described as a crazy building for sane researchers. This is the Media Lab building designed by Fumiko Maki, sometimes described as a sane building for crazy researchers. And in fact, the Media Lab, I believe, is the most diverse lab in the world in terms of the range of topics that we deal with. There are something like, I think now 25 groups that range from biomechatronics used working on prosthetic devices, high-tech prosthetic devices, lifelong kindergarten, which by the way is my favorite group name at the lab. And everyone has a statement in engaging people in creative learning processes. Sculpting evolution, Kevin is trying to eradicate Lyme disease. It's, for example, very sophisticated scientist. Opera of the future, looking at the future of music. You'll hear from people from other groups, I think tangible media, personal robots, human dynamics. My group is City Science. And what we've been focused on recently is what we think of as hyperlocal solutions to global challenges, more kind of bottom-up solutions. And I think this is critical since, for example, just with global warming, 70% of global emissions happen in cities. So we're really looking at the scale from the individual through the community to the city. I just want to highlight one project that attempts to bring a lot of the work that we're doing together. This is a climate model that we built, but looking at local solutions to climate with interventions that we model. We look at the percentage of electric vehicles, for example. This is a city car that we built a few years ago with robot wheels and drive-by-wire and folding, et cetera. And we can estimate the reduction in CO2 emissions with that. We look at live-work symmetry. This is a project we did in Hangzhou some years ago, looking at walkable access to resources with an interactive Cityscope platform. lightweight mobility and delivery. I think Naroa will talk a bit more about this. This is the persuasive electric vehicle that you call like an Uber. You drive it to your destination under human power, but it can autonomously follow you with packages or automatically rebalance itself. Compact transformable housing. This is looking at what we call living large in a smaller space. So this is a tiny apartment that dynamically transforms from living to dining to socializing to working, etc. We look at local resources. This is our city farm project we built a few years ago. All of these have reductions in CO2 emissions that are pretty dramatic if you took them to the extreme. And one of the things we're looking at now is what is practical with this kind of bottom-up approach to climate change. This is now putting it all together. We also believe that we need to get these things out into the world in the hands of public policy people and people in the community. So this is a project that I mentioned we did in Hangzhou a few years ago. Now we're developing, hope to finish next month, an urban simulation center in Shenzhen. You know, we're launching companies. So I think the next phase of our work is deploy, getting things out into the world. Okay, so that's a very quick overview of what we're doing. Thank you all.
Thank you, Ken. So today, the way we're going to be handling this today is that Chance will be introducing the individual speakers on a one-by-one basis. We will have 5 presentations, each lasting up to about 15 minutes, and then we will reconvene at the end for some discussions, and we welcome any questions that come through the live chat. So Chance, would you like to go ahead and introduce the first speaker?
Yeah, sure, and thanks for Ken's introduction. And now let's move on to our first presenter today, Huili Chen. Huili Chen is a PhD student in Personal Robots Group at MIT Media Lab, and her current research at MIT focuses on emotion-based interaction between humans and robots. So Huili, have you been ready for show?
Yeah, so I'm gonna share my slide.
Perfect.
Yeah, just one moment. So can we start now?
Yes.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Huili Chen. I'm currently a 4th-year PhD student in the Personal Robots Group. So my research is around how do we design personal robots to empower human-human social connection. So AI-enabled devices and machines are becoming increasingly prevalent in our daily life. We live with AI, we communicate with AI, or we communicate with other people through AI devices, such as Alexa, Google Home, or robots. So the concerns around AI agents' potential harm to human-human connections has also arisen accordingly. Some people, they might be worried that the interacting with those AI agents might marginalize human-human connections and interactions. So these concerns really heightens the sense of urgency for us to investigate the responsible design of AI agents for social good and also for human flourishing. And this is our ultimate research goal. So let's break this down a little bit and contextualize each key phrase. So for human flourishing, we ask the research question, can we become more socially connected with one another through the facilitation of socially embodied agents? For AI agents, we ask the research question, what type of social intelligence would enable those AI agents to promote positive human-human interactions and relationships? And then for responsible design, we ask the question, what approaches should we take to design, build, evaluate the computational systems that support those embodied AI agents? So to know how can we achieve the ultimate research goal, let's take a look at the current research landscape in human-robot interaction. So in the past decades, social robots have been mainly used for a single person interacting with a single robot scenarios in various domains, such as education and healthcare. In contrast, multiple person human-robot interaction still remains in its infancy. Only in recent years, a number of studies examined how do we design robot roles and behaviors in complex group settings, and how does a robot actually influence human groups' processes and dynamics, such as interpersonal trust among the group members. So why are there so few works on multiple person human-robot interaction? Because studying this context is essentially a way much harder and complex. So to address the main challenges and resolve bottlenecks, we proposed this multidisciplinary ecosystem framework. There are 3 pillars in this framework. So first, this framework defines the key aspects of a social robot's intelligence required in multi-person contexts, such as the robot multi-person social affective perception ability. Second, this framework assures the participation of different stakeholders in the design, development, and evaluation processes. Third, it incorporates theories, findings, and techniques from advanced computation, psychology, and human-centered design. So the 3 color-coded nodes are the 3 identified aspects of social intelligence that the robot needs to have: social affective perception in blue, the interaction context awareness in green, the robot's behavior and personalization policy in yellow. So in the center, we have the conceptual and theoretic framework. So that the theoretic framework guides all 3 key aspects of this intelligence and also the overall robot design. So for the rest of the presentation, we will briefly highlight a few projects for each key components. So we chose parent-child robot triadic interaction as a case study to illustrate the framework. So parent-child interaction is a core aspect of daily family interaction. High-quality reciprocal parent-child interactions help children develop socially, emotionally, cognitively, and linguistically. Not every child, however, has access to these enriching adult-child exchanges at home. The lack of parental education and guidance is a key contributor to this participation gap. And also during the COVID-19 pandemic, the parental demand for in-home educational resources was even magnified. So there was this compelling opportunity to leverage AI agents' unique benefits for this social cause. To really enhance interaction between people, a robot needs to be aware of the interaction context from a human-centered perspective, knowing what people really care about and also what they want the robot to do. So we call this perspective-taking ability robot's context awareness. So let's take a look at how we study this robot context awareness in the parent-child robot case. So in this project, we take an iterative design approach through interviews and lived technology experience to explore how do we design the triadic interactions, what kind of features, roles, and behaviors the parents and children would like the robot to have in the home. So for 3 to 6 weeks, we deployed and remotely teleoperated a social robot in the homes of 12 families with 3 to 7 years old children. So the parents and children engaged in a triadic story reading activity with the robot together for 6 sessions. So the robot we use is called Bulle, as shown in the picture. So 3 of them, 1 parent, 1 child, and the robot, they read books together using the story app we designed and deployed on the tablet. And then we adapted the strategies that is often used in real-time parent-child human coach interactions to our parent-child robot case. And we will see some short video clips exhibiting robots' different, interaction strategies in the study.
Hearing.
Fire engine is interesting. Let's chat about fire engine. Melody, maybe you can start the chat.
Mommy, in basketball, book about firefighters.
Oh,
Uh-huh.
do you like it?
Yeah.
And do you remember once, a few times we went to fire truck?
So the robot is actually like positioned on the right. The camera view only focuses on the parent-child, so that's why we couldn't actually see the robot there. But we could hear the robot's speech in the video clip. In this example, the robot asked a question, make a suggestion, and suggesting both the parent and child to chat with each other when they are reading stories. This is another example in which the robot instead directly asks a story question to the child. And then we can notice that the child didn't know the answer to that question. So the parent just very naturally scaffolded the child. They work together to figure out the answer.
She carried the wheat to the mill and the miller made it into flour. Sarah, what does miller mean? Do you know what it means? No. A miller is somebody who turns wheat into flour or other grains. And so they have a mill. We went to the plantation.
So then we interviewed the parents before and after they had the triadic robot interaction. We asked them to imagine they are the robot designers, how they would like to design the robot. So they discussed both the positive and negative aspects of interacting, as well as the specific design features they would like for the robot. And based on their experiential knowledge, we proposed the design guidelines for the parent-child robot triadic interactions at home. And these guidelines are multifaceted in that they cover views from all the three stakeholders, as well as in total 5 dimensions of the interaction. And now here are some examples of the design guidelines. For example, parents mentioned that the robot reminded them to engage in dialogic reading behaviors. They also mentioned that one benefit of the robot for their dyadic relationship is that the robot increased the novelty of the story reading engagement and making reading much more fun for both parent and child. And of course, they also talk about the concerns. For example, some parents think there was a lack of transparency on the robot functionality and capability. So when they were chatting with their child, they were not sure to what extent the robot was able to understand the conversation between the parent and the child. So what I'm showing here is just a snippet of the results we have. In general, these projects informs a robot of what it should do and what it should behave in this triadic context from a parent's and children's perspective, not from an engineering perspective. And for the sake of time, I will briefly touch upon other components in this ecosystem framework that we are currently actively working on. So when we want to design a specific robot facilitated human-human interaction, let's say like a robot for senior couples at home. So how and where do we start from scratch? Then how do we evaluate this interaction? We need to have some sort of domain general theoretical ground for any types of human group interaction. So this is to ensure that the overall interaction design is grounded in theories and findings from both social science and computing research. So we propose this theoretic foundation in this work. And so here I'm going to just highlight one theory from psychology that we use to develop the theoretic work. So the flow theory is a concept originated in psychology and widely used in education. Flow is used to describe people's positive mental states in the task context. A person's flow state emerges when their interactive capacity or skills levels match the challenges in an activity. So in our robot interaction, the robot's overall goal is defined as promoting the flow states of individuals in a group, as well as the group level flow state. And so on the left, this is the original flow state model for a person. The flow state is the diagonal zone here. So if the challenge exceeds a person's skills and then they feel anxious, if their skills are beyond the challenges and then they would feel bored. On the right, this is how a robot can mediate people's flow states using different behavior adaptation strategies that we propose in the theoretic work. So this is the strategy we propose, DRA. So the DRA strategy allows a robot to display various social roles, such as tutor to playful mate, peer roles. So the robot is always trying to keep a person or a group in this flow zone. The robot's goal is continuously keep a balance between people's perceived challenges and skills. And the red dots refer to the challenge skill balance state people are currently in at a given time. So in state 1 and state 2, people feel anxious. The activity is just too challenging for them. So when people are in state 1 and 2, the robot could exhibit helping behaviors and providing coaching advice to direct people back from the anxiety mode into the flow zone. When people are in state 3, they feel bored because the task is too easy. And then in that case, the robot could ask stimulating questions and making people feel more intellectually challenged with the goal of, directing them back to the flow state. And over time, we can see that people, they just move along the diagonal line all the way upwards. And here we also have we are also on robot social affective perception and also the behavior strategy. So for example, we also collected multimodal data sets of parent-child reading stories in a naturalistic setting with a robot at all. And then we extracted their verbal and nonverbal cues and study and build machine learning models to understand how those verbal cues tell us about their interpersonal dynamics and relationships, such as how they move their body and how they nodding their heads review their parenting styles and parenting stress, as well as the child's temperament. So those are the projects we are currently working on. And thank you very much. That's all for today's presentation.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Willy, for the great presentation. Yeah, and next, let's welcome our today's second presenter, Jack, from Tangible Media Group, and he will talk on his recent work on 3D printing fabrics and robotic fabrics. Yep.
Great. Hello, everybody. Thank you for the introduction, Jiaxi. My name is Jack. I'm a current PhD student in the Tangible Media Group. Today, I'll be presenting my research in textiles, reinventing the fabrics of everyday life. So I'm going to talk about a few projects. This first one starts with a project that actually took place when I was at Carnegie Mellon looking at two-way morphing soft thread actuators for tangible interfaces. And so in this work, we take a thread, which is a long strand of fiber material that's much longer than it is wide and is used to make or compose textiles. And there's been a lot of research looking at how to invent or add interactivity into thread, whether that's through a conductive coating or through a heat-sensitive heat-sensitive color pigment. And so in this work, we're interested in making actuated thread. Why would we want to make it? Well, actuated threads can be used to make actuating textiles, which allow us to create textiles that can respond to different environments or different signals, such as a change in temperature or to apply a pressure to notify us of a certain notification or text. But I'll talk about this in some of the applications we talk about. First, I'm going to talk about the thread design. An important factor to this thread is that we have embedded reversibility. This is a fiber that when you heat it, it doesn't just shrink, but it can reverse back to its original length. This is important because if something just shrinks once, it can't be an input and output device. The basis of computing is a 0 and a 1 and being able to toggle between them. The second is that this fiber, we want it to be competitive with other morphing kind of options. And so we looked at things like nitinol. We want it to be easily powered. We want it to be compatible with textiles so we can knit, sew, and weave with it. And we also want it to be relatively cost effective. If it costs too much to make a meter of it, you can't make a textile of it. So essentially we're asking, does it work? Can you make it? And can you work with it? So in order to create this thread, we use a silver coated twisted then coiled fishing line. So this is a polymer muscle that uses very high levels of twist in the structure to convert what would normally be a 3% shrinkage into a 30% stroke with large lifting forces. This is not something that we invented, but an important modification we made to it was the silicone coating. The silicone coating basically resists, when you heat the fiber, it shrinks, which compresses the silicone. And when you remove the heat, the silicone stretches the fiber back out. Here's the basic mechanism. We have a normal fiber before twisting it, that when you heat it, it shrinks a little bit. If you twist it a lot, you get something that when you heat it, it untwists. So you have a torsional actuator. And then when you twist and coil it, you get a fiber that contracts around 30%. So this is a breakdown of the anatomy of the fiber. Here you see the twisted then coiled polymer muscle with the silicone coating on top. So this is the first step where we coil the fiber. We then ply it to make a torque balance structure. So this allows it to be stable and not trying to untwist itself. We then train it through different thermal loading. We coat it with silicone, and that is our final fiber. And so to make much longer fibers, we made a semi-automated coiling machine. So this we can make meters of our fiber with, and our fibers can have different motion types. They can be twisting, they can be shrinking and reversing, or they can be 2-ply shrinking. These are very similar to this 1-ply, except they don't have a tendency to untwist. We looked at analyzing the kind of linear performance and see that we get around in peak performance around a 5% reversible actuation. We can kind of build up rotations for the spinning ones by turning on and off the power supply at the correct times to allow, similar to how a child is on a swing. And these fibers can also act not just as an output device, but also as a capacitive sensor and input device. And so with this, we created a self-stirring tea bag. So in the hot water, it'll actuate the fiber, which is thermally activated. And when you take it out of the water, it spins in the other direction and you can continue to brew your tea. This is a dress that has a vent in it that's adaptive. Here we're looking at this fiber for kind of aesthetic elements. And self-pleating fabrics. So these are a fabric that we imagine can change its insulation in response to high temperatures. And this last one is a notification garment that when one receives a text, this fiber here will begin to shrink and squeeze against the arm. Once the notification is realized, it will release off of the arm. And so in the future, we're interested in knitting and weaving with these actuated textiles, making some modifications to make their actuation faster. and ultimately trying to realize this vision where the garments that we're wearing are adaptive and responsive to our emerging environments. And we ended up creating a 4-look clothing collection based off of this. Another work where we started to explore shape-changing textiles involves printing hydrogels onto textiles to make these shape-changing hydroscopic composites. So we use a hydrogel capicaraginin, which is biodegradable, and by creating a 3D printer that's actually able to print these hydrogel structures and printing them onto textiles, we're able to, when the hydrogel dries, the fabric will curl, but when exposed to water, it will reversibly uncurl. And this is a kind of two-way actuation. And we find that the way that you print, the grain direction of the fabrics affects the morphing. The shape of the textile can be modified to get different kind of flaps or curls. And the patterns also that we print can be used to make some parts that actuate and some parts that remain static. So this is the overall design space of what we're able to vary with our textiles. And so this is an electricity-free, human-safe, accessible to produce method for producing actuating textiles. My more recent work is Defextiles, and this is on 3D printing quasi-woven fabric via under extrusion. So this is a work that I did with my advisor Hiroshi and also 2 other students, Doa Doan and Hamilton Forsyth. And we presented this at WIST in 2020. The background for this is that, and especially when I was talking earlier about the fashion show that I did, it's surprisingly or shockingly difficult to make a flat sheet of textile into a 3D form. It either requires practiced and skilled hands to carry out time-consuming tasks, or it requires use and training of these very capable but very difficult to use Shimasaki knitting machines. And so there's been interest in the realm of 3D printing in a way to make 3D printed fabrics. Most of these examples are more comparable to a chainmail or a chainmail type of like interlocking mechanisms than it would be a fabric. And so in this project, we develop an approach that allows flexible, thin textiles of many materials to be quickly printed into arbitrary shapes with tunable properties using an unmodified, inexpensive 3D printer. And to do this, we're using a normal FDM 3D printer, but we're purposely under extruding material so we get periodic gaps that emerge in the structure. And these gaps end up stacking on top of each other, and we get these kind of woven mesh-like structures. And so this is again done by not pushing out enough material from the nozzle than we're supposed to. So kind of an adversarial use of a FDM printer. And by getting this number just right, we can create these kind of porous, repetitive structures. And we do a characterization to see how increasing the print speed allows us to produce textiles that are more flexible, and decreasing the extrusion multiplier allows us to get textiles that are more flexible and also just more sparse. Here's kind of a diagram of these structures in the printing that I showed earlier. The design process for these textiles is surprisingly easy. You design basically a single wall print in a CAD design, you upload it to the printer, you set the extrusion multiplier to 0.3, and and then you can just go straight to printing. So there's a few applications that we had in mind for this. The first is for clothing design. So clothing designers either have to rely on a sketch to communicate a design or make a version of the garment. We imagine this as like an in-between where they could print out preforms of the garment to show and be able to model and have a tangible kind of representation. We also imagine that for the future of buying clothing, because 50% of clothing is returned and generally it's not even restocked, this could be a way to print out a preform of the garment This print takes about 24 hours to print, so it's faster than Amazon Prime. And you can try on a garment before ordering it. And then we imagine this skirt could then be broken back down and remade into a filament and used to print something else. We can also modify existing textiles. So this is heat bonding a pocket onto a shirt where I can hold my circuit boards. And we can print with multiple materials. So this is a lamp where we have conductive pads printed into it. And so this allows for capacitive sensing. So you have an interactive lampshade. And an important part of this is that the flexible lampshade, the solid supports, and these conductive pads were all produced in a single print using a multi-material printer. We can also create these tendon actuators. The most interesting part of this is that this was produced in a single print. So the tendon threaded through through this dancing man. There was no post-processing needed. We can print with very flexible materials. So this is a badminton shuttlecock where this affords the porosity needed to get like the desirable drag effects of a badminton birdie. And finally, this is an interesting stress test of the technique. We produced a 70-meter roll of the textile in a single print on a desktop printer. We printed it as an upright roll and could unroll it to 70 meters, which this is an overhead drone shot of the textile. I'll just show the actual roll one more time. So this came off of the printer as a single print. Yeah, so this was my work in 3D printing quasi-woven fabric via under extrusion, and moving forward, I'm continuing to work on these advanced fabrics and fibers, and excited to talk more about those when those projects are out in the public. Thank you for listening, and I think there's a Q&A session later. One thing I would just like to also note is that this fiber technique, since publishing it, around over 10 people have contacted me saying, I was able to reproduce it with my printer, and people have made like beautiful lampshades with it. So if you have, if you're curious about trying this technique and you want to know where to get started, first, I would recommend looking at the paper, but also you can reach out to me and I'll help get your feet on the ground with that. Yeah, thank you for listening.
Thank you, Jack, for the sharing your work recently, the futuristic 3D printing technology. It's really cool. And next, let's welcome Naroa. Naroa is a PhD student in City Science Group, and her research is focused on designing future mobility modes. And yeah, let's welcome Naroa.
Hi, let me share the screen. All set. So hello, my name is Naroa Coretti, and I'm a PhD student, as Chen said, at the City Science Group. So you already have seen some of our research in the introductory talk by Kent Larson, who's our group director, but I will be focusing more on the mobility line of research, and I will be talking about ultra-lightweight shared autonomous vehicles. So Kent already touched upon some of these ideas, but I wanted to start by briefly explaining what is our vision for future cities. So for thousands of years, cities were a human-centric hub of innovation where people lived and worked within a walkable distance. But then in just 100 years, with the introduction of the car, there was a dramatic shift in urbanism, and the cities have been designed for cars and not longer for humans. And we believe that future cities should go back to having a human scale, being composed of walkable districts where people can find whatever they need for daily life within a walkable distance. So the idea is that within these walkable districts, most people would, like most of the trips would be short distance, one person and low speed. So the idea is that in these districts, people would choose either to walk or to use micromobility modes. And these micromobility systems would also provide the first and last mile connection to mass transit when traveling between districts. So as we think of micromobility systems for the future, they have already become very popular in the US. During the last years, especially like during the last 3 years, the ridership has increased exponentially. And 45% of these trips are substituting car trips, which is great data.
However, despite their popularity, the systems face a number of challenges. Now I will be focusing on the challenges related to bike sharing systems, but for example, scooter sharing systems have very similar problems. And one of them, the biggest challenges is the rebalancing problem. So the rebalancing problem occurs as a consequence of the uneven travel patterns in cities. So for example, bicycles tend to accumulate in central business districts or university campuses in the mornings, and then other areas get empty of bicycles. And to solve this problem, operators need to rebalance the bicycles in bands, which has a very high economic and ecological impact. So for example, here we can see data for London, which is a little bit old, but it does make a very interesting point that, for example, the miles that are traveled by the rebalancing bands exceed the number of miles that were saved by the bike sharing system. And then the other most relevant challenge related to this system, systems is the bicycle oversupply, which mainly relates to dockless systems. So dockless systems are the ones where you don't have to leave the bicycles at a station. You can leave them virtually anywhere. Now, although now there are some restrictions. But what happens with these systems is that the bicycles are very inexpensive. The operators are not limited by the number of stations and docks that they have. And it is a very competitive market. So they have been deploying large fleet sizes, and these fleet sizes exceed the infrastructure capabilities of cities. And they have caused many urban problems, like the one that we can see to the left, where bicycles are clogging the streets. And then as a reaction to this, many cities have banned the operation of these programs, and the bicycles removed from cities are being piled up in massive graveyards, which is an ecological disaster. So we believe that autonomy could potentially solve some of these issues, because if, for example, we had autonomous bicycles, we would be able, like the bicycles would be able to rebalance by themselves, and then this would eliminate the rebalancing problem for the operators, but also for the users, it would eliminate the problem to find available bicycles or docks. At the same time, this would improve the predictability and reliability of the systems, which is very important, especially for commuting trips. And then as the system would be inherently more efficient, ideally we would also be serving like more demand with fewer bicycles. So this would also help to alleviate the bicycle oversupply problem. So with this idea in mind, our group has developed shared autonomous micromobility systems, such as the PEV or persuasive electric vehicle. So the PEV is a lightweight autonomous three-wheeler designed for shared use. So you would call for it as you call for an Uber. It would drive autonomously to wherever you are. And then you can ride it to your destination. And it also has a container in the rear that is designed also so that it can transport goods or even food because it's refrigerated. And then in addition for this project, we have done a great deal of research around human-machine interaction, investigating how future autonomous vehicles will communicate with pedestrians. So for example, letting them know that the vehicle has seen them and that it is, for example, safe to cross. And then in a more recent project, we extended the model of the PEV into an even more lightweight vehicle. And it is this bicycle with a split wheel system that behaves as a tricycle for the autonomous drive, so that it provides the necessary lateral stability, but then the wheels rejoin into a single wheel, so that you can use it just as a regular bicycle. So the idea again here is that this could bring the convenience of mobility on demand system into already very popular bike sharing systems. So in addition to prototyping vehicles, we also do simulation studies to understand and quantify the fleet behavior of the shared autonomous micromobility systems. And for example, in this project, we studied the impact of the behavior of autonomous bicycles compared to current station-based and dockless bicycles. So this study was based on Blue Bike data to model the demand, and then we simulated many different scenarios with different modeling hypotheses. And the results of this study showed that with a fleet size 3.5 to 8 times smaller than current station-based and dockless systems, the autonomous bike sharing system could improve both the system efficiency and the user experience. So here you can see another visualization of the simulation where all the systems are serving the same demand. And as you can see, like even visually, we can tell that the autonomous system has much fewer bicycles. And then once that we saw that autonomy could improve the efficiency of current bike sharing systems and reduce fleet sizes, we also wanted to study if autonomy could make these systems more sustainable. And for that, we conducted a comparative life cycle assessment. And it is well known that conducting environmental impact assessments at an early technological stage, it's very challenging because there is a lack of real-world data, and this increases the uncertainty related to these studies. But at the same time, the reason why it is very important to do it at this stage is because it's when there is the greatest opportunity to influence the design and then the environmental impacts of a technology. So for these scenarios, it is usually recommended to conduct like a simplified life cycle assessment and then to focus the effort on doing like broader scenario exploration and sensitivity analysis to help identify what are the key parameters that will impact the environmental performance of autonomous shared bicycles. The specific methodology that we followed for this study is the methodology for new mobility proposed by the International Transport Forum. And before showing the results of this study, I'd like to highlight that even if life cycle assessments are very useful methodologies to understand the impacts of a product or a service, they depend a lot on the modeling hypothesis, and the environmental impacts are always very case specific. So we can't just extrapolate these results to any scenario. But with the assumptions that we consider for the nominal case of our study, the autonomous system would emit 52 grams of CO2 equivalent per passenger kilometer traveled, and that is 33% less than current station-based systems and almost 60% less than the dockless systems. And this reduction is mainly a consequence of the fact that we are removing the operational services and that the trucks or vans that are rebalancing the bicycles, because the bicycles rebalance by themselves. And then we are also reducing the fleet size, as we saw in the previous simulation, and that also helps to reduce the environmental impact. And then to the right, we can see how the environmental performance of these systems compare with other new and traditional mobility modes, as defined by the ITF. And this is important because even if we say that autonomy could reduce the environmental impacts of current bike sharing systems, the overall impact that they have in cities will depend on the mode shift that they generate. So just as a very simple example, for example, if the person that took the autonomous bicycle trip would have otherwise used their own bicycle, we might be adding 36 grams of CO2 equivalent per passenger kilometer traveled in that trip. Whereas if the person would have used their private car instead, we might be removing like 110 grams of CO2. So this means that as we design these shared bicycle systems, we not only have to focus on making them as environmentally friendly as possible, but also we have to design them so that they trigger a mode shift from the most polluting modes. So just as a quick recap, a quick summary, we believe that future cities should be composed of high-performing walkable districts that provide walkable access to amenities, and this would incentivize walking and the use of shared micromobility. Then our studies show that autonomy can improve the efficiency of current bike sharing systems and that it could also potentially reduce their environmental impact. But we say that this impact will depend on how the systems are designed and implemented, and also on the mobility shift, on the mode shift that they create. So this is why we think that it is very important, as we are doing for this study, to conduct assessments of their potential impacts while they are under development, so that we are able to integrate the learnings into their design. So with that, I'll conclude the presentation, and thanks so much for listening.
Thank you, Naroa, for the presentation. And for the next speaker, we will have Bernardo from Human Dynamics Group, and he would like to talk about his work on the network inside cities and their relationships to politics, and the work about food environments within cities. So let me pass the mic to Bernardo.
Hello, everyone. I am Bernardo, and let me share my screen. So first, I will present the effect of food environments. This is a result. This is some exciting work we have done for over a year. It's a result of a collaboration between a team here in Human Dynamics and a team in the University of South California School of Medicine. Here I have the name of the wonderful co-authors of this project that has been the result of a nice interdisciplinary project. Just as some context, in human dynamics, what we aim to study is exactly the connections between humans, the spaces where we connect, and what is the effect these spaces can have in each human or in each person, as well as in the collectives. The goal of this work was to look into a question that has been researched for a lot of time, which is, what is the effect of a food environment? What if I get a new job somewhere, will the food environment around this new job affect me in ways that are maybe not so intuitive, or what will happen? In order to study these effects, we use mobility data. Mobility data is anonymized data from users that come from their phones, and it consists in many pings of users that say, okay, this person or this user was around this place in the morning, then around this place at night, and around this place at noon. Sensitive locations such as the house of the person or the exact work location are obfuscated, so that to preserve privacy. And this data has a lot to contribute in this sense because of something that the literature had not yet been able to address before. So in order to explain this, I will refer to a very classic paper in the literature of food environments. This paper is called Food Swamps Predict Obesity Rates Rather Than Food Deserts in the US. And it's a very interesting study. What they did was saying they will study where you live and how the environment where you live affects you. Now, given that in this case, the food environment, they are referring to a place where maybe it's a food swamp, which is a place where you do have many meal options, but most of them have low nutritional content. So an example of this is fast food. Now, in order to make a causal claim here, what the authors did a very clever thing, which is, well, if I live to a McDonald's, then I am probably a different person than if I decide to not live by a McDonald's. But the authors use an instrumental variable approach, which what that means is that they said, let's just see how far people live from interstate highways. Because if I live close or far to an interstate highway, it doesn't say that much about my food preference, so or my health in general. And but what happens if you live close to an interstate highway is that you will have many low nutritional content around you of meals, because interstate highways have many stops, and there you have many fast food chains. What these authors found is that actually, yes, if you have more access to these kind of food swamps, you are more likely to suffer from obesity and other health problems that can come from malnutrition. Now, something interesting that happened in this project is that the results were very consistent, except when you got to the big cities. And the reason that was even posed in this study as a possibility, and that we think is the case, is that if you live in a city, then the place where you live says very little about the place where you will wind up consuming food. Myself, I am a native from Mexico City, and it's a huge city. And the way it would work for us is that you leave your house in the morning, ready to not go back until the night, and just do all of your activities. So in the end, the food environment that would have been around my house did not affect that much the food decisions I would take, because I wouldn't even be there. And this is where mobility data comes in and can help make these kind of studies that are super important for public policy. So what we study is this. So suppose we have two people, and around their residence, they do have many fast food options. However, during daytime, one of the persons goes to a place which is abundant in healthy food options, and the other person goes to a place which is abundant in low nutritional food options. And then mobility data can actually help us know who is whom, and can help us trace what kind of exposure I had and whether I wind up visiting a food environment. And as many city dwellers know, the food environment where we wind up is usually not of our choice and is determined by where we work or where we have to do some kind of duties. So now thinking about the contributions that we do in this paper, the first one is we pinpoint or we are able to give metrics that show the relevance of using mobility data in studying the city's food environments. The next thing we are able to elicit is how do our visits to fast food change when we have more alternatives in our food environments? And I want to, here in this question, I want to stop just to say something that that helps understand what is the importance of this question. Now, if I live in a place, I live in Cambridge, and I do not have a fast food place close to my home, then the fact that I don't have it will actually make it impossible for me to go unless I travel very far. And if I have it, then it will be possible for me to go. And so in this case, that is a bit intuitive, and we want to go beyond that quest. And we want to say, okay, now, given that you have a fast food outlet close to you, will you go more to it if you have less alternatives? Or will you decide to just go just as much? And the answer to this is not trivial, because some people can say, well, many people are aware of the ill effects consuming too much fast food can have on health. And therefore, even if you don't give them additional options, they will find other alternatives, such as bringing their own lunch from their houses, or skipping a meal, or any other alternative to go to fast food. Now, the other option is that actually people will go more once you remove the alternatives. And the next contribution we make is whether this change is reflected in the medium term. So one thing is, well, maybe we can do a big panel study and see what users do when they have different options. But what happens if I get a new job and I go somewhere? Will the food environment affect me just as much as if it's a new place? That is something we looked at. And then finally, we looked at whether there are any causal claims we can do. And for this, even if we cannot find the perfect clean experiment where we send different people to different places, we think we found cases where we are convinced that, or it seems that all the evidence is pointing in the same way. So you know a little bit about the data. The data is, we have 6 months of mobility data before the pandemic in 11 metropolitan areas. And one of these is Los Angeles. And to give an example of, I mean, I guess many of you, if you come from cities, know that cities can be very diverse in terms of their food environments. Just to show that, this is a map of Los Angeles, and we color different cells by the proportion of fast food places that are around the people in each cell. So for instance, we can see that this part is, this part by the hills is a part where there is very low proportion of fast food places. However, once you go to other places in LA or in the Valley or more south, what you will see is that you can be exposed to these food swamps in almost randomly. There does not seem to be a very clear pattern. They seem to be able to be everywhere. The next question we asked was, how relevant is the home food environment? This question was important for us because then we can say, well, if the people consume everything close to their houses, then we should be studying the home food environment. If they consume it close to other places, then we should look at these other places. So these are some plots, some histograms where we plot the distance people traveled to go for lunch at noon. These whole studies around going for lunch. And we did 2 different options. One is, what is the distance between your house? This is panel B, your house and the place where you went for lunch. And what is the distance between the place where you went for lunch and your last stay before 11:30? That was not a food stay. What this is trying to capture is the place where you went for work or to run your errand. And what we see is that actually people do not eat close to their houses in the big cities. People eat close to where they had to go or where they decided to go. Given this, we proposed this baseline framework. I will first show it with this image. What we show here is a trajectory of a person through the day. Suppose here that this blue dot is the house of the person. And then the next dots are the stays the person does in the morning. And then this red dot marked with a C is the context. We call it the context of the person, which is where this point where you were before 11:30, that was not a food stay. And what that is trying to capture the context of your day, or where you work, or where you go to school, for instance. In many of these cases, the location is obfuscated, but in the data set, but it anyway portrays the census block group where the person is. And then once we pinpoint the context, we can measure what alternatives of food are around this context. And then we can measure this green dot, which is where did the person went to retrieve the food. So here I put a little description of the text. We consider the context to be the last stay between 10 and 11:30. We have run this analysis using other definitions, such as the longest stay between 8 a.m. and 11:30, and the results do not really change. And now this is the part that I was mentioning before. We will only consider cases when there was fast food, because obviously if there is not any fast food, you cannot go to fast food, so we will get a huge effect. But then it's a huge effect that it's not that interesting, because it's saying if you don't have fast food, you cannot go to fast food. But we want to know, if you have it, will you change your decision depending on the alternatives you have around you? And for that, for each day, we classify the people in 3 categories. One is the person chose to go to a fast food. If the person was observed in a fast food outlet between 15 to 12 and 15 to 2. Not choosing fast food if the person went for food but somewhere else, and just not eating. If the person just didn't decide to skip the meal, or somehow just have his or her lunch wherever her context was somehow. The first question was, we will just do a panel study. We will put everyone, we will do individual fixed effects. What I mean with individual fixed effects is we will do a regression where we say, how did the decision to go for fast food change according to the number of non-fast food options and the number of fast food options around a person? This is again with the restriction of at least having one fast food option. But in this regression, we will also put one additional term representing each person. Therefore, if I am a person that consumes a lot of fast food, this additional term will be higher for me than for the rest. And that way we will avoid endogeneity, in the sense that maybe I consume a lot of fast food, but and I am always in places with fast food around me. But this effect is not coming from the environment, just from the fact that I am a person that consumes a lot of fast food or visits a lot fast food outlets. So this we did this regression, and we find significant effects across the board in our 2 metrics. In one model, we regressed the decision to go to fast food, explained by the number of fast food outlets and non-fast food outlets around you. And in that model, what we find is that the more non-fast food outlets you have, the least likely it is that you will actually wind up going to a fast food outlet. And the more fast food outlets, it is easier. We will go more to a fast food outlet. And in the other model, we call it the closer alternatives, which tries to capture, or which actually captures, how many non-fast food outlets do you have before the first fast food outlet. And there we see that actually, if you have many alternatives before or just as close or closer than the fast food outlets, you will go to these alternatives. So what this is saying is, it seems that the decision to go to a fast food outlet is not just based on the accessibility to the fast food outlet, but also on what alternatives you have, which is then super relevant for policy, because then it says, are we going to fast food outlets because we prefer, or because we have fewer choices? There are some limitations. One particular one is, what if I am a person that, if I know that I want to go to a fast food outlet, I will spend my whole day in that area. And that could actually be biasing the results. So for that, we did a second study. In this study, we try to look at the setting where people are generally through their days. and we found people who moved. So we found people who usually we would see them at one place, and then at some point they shifted their context, and now every day we see them at some other place. This is very few of our panel users, but since we have 11 cities, this wind up being around 40,000 people. And then once we traced the people who moved, we said, okay, now we can just divide them in groups, and we can say suppose that I moved to I moved from one environment to another, and my friend John also moved from one environment to another. And initially we were both in a similar environment, but I went to an environment which was more restrictive in terms of food alternatives, and John went to an environment similar to the one we had. Will it happen that I will be consuming more fast food, or I will be visiting more fast food than John, or will I keep my consumption the same? And what we see in these plots is that actually I can even double my consumption. So this is the example I was giving. Suppose that this is a trajectory of the mean visits to fast food per user each day before moving and after moving. So here the 0 is the day that the person changed routine. These intervals are constructed with a sliding window. And what we see is that, here we have two groups, high-low and high-high. High-low is people who were in a high diversity environment and moved to a low diversity environment. And high-high is people who were in high diversity and remained in high diversity. And what we see here is that the people who were in the people before moving, everyone was consuming or visiting fast food at the same rates. However, after moving, the people who wind up going to a low diversity food environment, it seems that they doubled their fast food consumption. And the exact same case, the exact or opposite case is seen when we observe people who went from low diversity environments to high diversity environments. Here, the people who actually went to a more diverse food environment with more options reduced their consumption by half, which is again saying it might not be that we go to fast food because we prefer it, because we prefer it, but actually because of the food environment we have around us. One limitation that you could think here is, well, what if this group was different? The purple group is a different group than the green group. That is possible if there was a surprise shock. For example, if you didn't know you would move, maybe you got fired and you wind up going to a food environment that's worse just to save some money. And then in that case, then that could explain this effect. But we find it less and less likely. And the last study is a natural experiment where we try to just see, this is not, this has some problems as a natural experiment, but we try to see what happens when you go to the RMV to get a license. And the advantage of this is that even if you will probably choose an RMV that's close to your house, there aren't that many RMVs in cities. So you probably have to travel far away. And you will probably not decide the RMV you go based on the food environment around it. So we did that model, we ran the regressions, and what we find was the same as in the other studies, which is even when we control by the person's previous preference for fast food and the person's income, having more accessible alternatives to non-fast food outlets reduces the visits to fast food outlets. So again, these are not independent. Here I put a consolidation of the three results. And what we see here is that all the results are getting different signs. So the size of the effect is hard to tell, but also all the results are studying different contexts. One is new place, one is the quotidian place, one is everyone. So, but all the signs are the same, which seems to tell us in this model that in very different scenarios, we still see the same pattern, that having more alternatives before the first fast food place will reduce the visits to fast food. And this has, as you can imagine, many implications for zoning regulations and public policy that cities can do, or subsidies that cities can give. to make the food environment more fair and more accessible to everyone. And that is it. Thank you all for listening, and I thank also the team I mentioned before for their great for the great work.
Wonderful presentation, Bernardo. Yeah, and next we will have our last presenter today, Abhishek from Camera Culture, and his research are focused on distributed and private inference. So let's welcome Abhishek.
Thanks, Chance, for the introduction. I will share my screen. True. Okay, so yeah, hi everyone, I'm Abhishek, and I'll be talking about how to solve the friction between data privacy and data utility using tools like machine learning. So first and foremost, the biggest problem, as we know today in this digital world, is data privacy. As we interact with ever-increasing number of data capturing devices, sensors, and digital services, the emerging problem is how do we make sure that we can utilize these services at the same time also protect privacy of the individuals, and also make sure that sensitive information does not reach or have any unintended consequences. So while here we argue data privacy is important, turns out data privacy is also necessary, given that we are using AI for several applications and with several application and impactful services which are building upon machine learning. And to understand how this stack connects with data privacy, we have to look at the pyramid of machine learning. So in the very beginning itself, we start with data sharing, then we go to model design, then we go to machine learning, and then finally we have impact through these services and tools. And turns out if we cannot take care of data privacy, then our foundation is gone. So to really build next generation machine learning based tools, we need to make sure that data privacy can be preserved. And at the same time, we can also do some reasonably useful task on it. Because one easy solution to protect data privacy is to just not share data at all. But clearly then there's no utility left. And hence we need to somehow figure out a middle way between this dichotomy. So to understand this dichotomy even more, we'll just take two examples. So we will have Google Maps where we can see all the traffic around us, and that helps us in navigation and planning. But in order to see that, we have to share our location data with Google Maps. And although it gives us super high utility for various planning purposes, there's not much privacy there. And on the other end of the spectrum, we have health data, which is protected by various regulations, laws, and data usually never leaves the hospital. But at the same time, there are countless applications possible if we can share that health data with various institutions, which can build new techniques, new models for digital health, and so on. So the goal of this privacy preserving machine learning is to find a middle way between this dichotomy where we can also preserve privacy and at the same time try to achieve utility. And turns out in some cases, we don't have to actually view this as a dichotomy by using some sophisticated tools, which I'll be talking about. And before I deep dive into the tools, the intuition is as follows. We have 3R principle here. We can protect information by removal, by randomization, and replacement. And what they mean is you can share wisdom instead of data. And to go from data to wisdom, you can apply this principle of removal, or you can randomize your data in such a way that wisdom is obtained in this random transformation. Or you can just replace the, let's say, sensitive information from data in order to get some kind of utility-aware wisdom. So let's take a deep dive into this. So first we start with removal-based privacy. And in the first row, we are showing the existing workflow where we have a user device. You can think of a smartphone, which sends data to a machine learning model, and then model does some computation on it and returns back the result. And this data can be viewed as, for example, if you're using voice assistant, then you're sending your voice data to the server and you're getting some useful service back. So the way we are solving this data privacy problem here is by proposing a new workflow where the user device also does some partial amount of computation. So for example, they can run a small machine learning model, and that model extracts wisdom, and that wisdom is sent to the server. And then the server can run their services and send back responses. But the key idea is that the server should not be able to extract the raw sensitive data just by looking at the wisdom. So in going in even in one more depth, we have this architecture where, as you can see, we start with an input image, and we perform some kind of a spatial decoupling where we generate images into patches. Then we apply basically a machine learning model on it, which is converting an image to a feature map representation. And this feature map representation is essentially removing things which are not useful for the task, but at the same time reveal privacy. And once we have removed those things, then we only send features which are useful for privacy. Which are useful for utility. And that can go to the task, which is being run on the cloud, or it can also land on an adversary device, which can try to reconstruct. And as we will see soon, the reconstruction turns out not to be so good if we remove sensitive information. One key idea here I want to highlight is that there are two uses of machine learning happening here. One is we are using machine learning as the overall thing, which is like, let's say, using voice assistant or doing some kind of, let's say, facial diagnosis and so on. But we are also using machine learning to ensure that privacy is obtained, because in order to eliminate any possible attack on the cloud, we are training an ML model, which is being trained to prevent any possible adversary that can reconstruct the data. So it's like using machine learning for privacy. So yeah, as we can see here, results on removal. First row is the original image repeated multiple times for illustration. And then the next three rows are our baselines. But in the final row, we have our technique, which we call DISCO. DISCO refers to dynamic and invariant sensitive channel obfuscation. And what it is saying is that when adversary sees this image, when adversary sees the wisdom extracted from the image, the best it can reconstruct is the columns you see on the most bottom row. And remaining of the rows show other techniques which are able to leak some information. And also these blocks in the columns refer to where we perform the partitioning, as I had shown in the previous slide, where we partition a full machine learning model into user and server model. So yeah, this was published last year in CPR. And now we'll jump to randomization-based schemes. So again, the same idea is present at a fundamental level, which is to partition a network into trusted and untrusted entities. So again, here we have an input image. We pass it through a trusted network, and this trusted network then sends the data. But we also know that this trusted network can send the data to an adversary, and this adversary can try to reconstruct the data. So this is conventional schemes, and you can see here that just partitioning is not enough, because even if we partition the network and obtain some, let's say, representation, the adversary is still able to reconstruct on the right. So we really want to develop a technique which randomizes this representation, which is being sent to the untrusted network, such that the adversary is not capable of generating the exact image or having the best reconstruction possible. So what we do here is we use statistical independence-based idea, which is we call it distance correlation. And what it does is it takes an input, it generates a representation, which we had seen before, and it tries to decrease the correlation between the input image and the representation. And just by doing this increase of correlation, we get to see that the best an adversary can reconstruct is the image on the right, which is very blurred and lossy reconstruction in comparison to the what reconstruction we had seen before with conventional schemes. And another interesting thing here is usually correlation measures statistical dependence, but as we know, for data sets which are high dimensional, like images and voice data for voice assistants, this is not possible because most of the dependence lies in non-linear dependencies of in a statistical measure. So what we are really interested here in is to measure all possible correlations which can exist in linear, non-linear fashion anyway. So yeah, this is the result we see. And here we are seeing how neural network sees the intermediate representations. So on the right side, we have the representation obtained by our technique, no-peak. And on the left side, we have regular representation which come out of a neural network. So what you're seeing on the leftmost column and rightmost column is how a neural network sees an image. So it takes an image, it removes information, but turns out on the left, if you just remove information and preserve what matters for the task, you still get a reasonable amount of features of the image that can still allow an adversary to reconstruct the image. But on the right side, what we see here is that the information is very obfuscated and, let's say, decorrelated. And that's happening because of the additional objective we introduce into our learning algorithms. So now we go to the next stage where we, instead of removing or randomizing information, we replace it. And what replacement means at a high level is that we want to anonymize sensitive data by synthesizing the sensitive parts of it. So in many applications and use cases, we do not want to protect every individual bit of the data. All we want to protect is essentially some sensitive information. So for example, if we take this particular paper we studied here, where we consider face images, and the only thing we want to protect is the race, the ethnicity and the age of the individual. And the way we want to protect it is in a way where everything else should be visible to my untrusted server, who is going to train a machine learning model or do any kind of statistical analysis on top of it. And our approach to achieve such a anonymization is by taking this data set and we smash it into some disentangled representation where we extract sensitive parts of it separately and then sample them from the distribution to transform them into non-sensitive parts, and then we just reconstruct. So the image you see on the right does not allow an adversary to reconstruct the original image. At the same time, it still allows to capture some of the semantics, for example, smiling and pose of the face, which are useful for downstream tasks. So the best advantage of this technique is essentially the fact that it selectively anonymizes information and does not remove or randomize the whole data set. And this could be useful for many applications where the data sharing entity, for example, in this case, user, does not know what is being, what is the downstream use of the data. So for example, I can share my data and it could be useful for 100 different things, which will be decided by scientists. But I definitely know that I do not want to share my ethnicity. Then in that case, I can use this technique where I just want to know what I want to protect, but I do not know what could be different services which can be utilized using this data set. So these are different use cases which we build upon and design techniques accordingly. And while designing this whole scheme, we essentially developed a new variational autoencoder architecture, where we showed that it is possible to take an image and represent in a space where you can separate sensitive information with non-sensitive information. And this task is broadly called disentanglement, where people want to disentangle different attributes which are semantic from an image. And turns out it's very difficult because an image can have multiple things located in the same place, so it's localized. So in this work, essentially, we showed how to do it using some new additional objectives which we can introduce on our standard variational autoencoders. So in conclusion, I essentially showed how we are trying to address the problem of data privacy at scale by looking at data sets like images and other high dimensional data sets. And the key idea here is that information can be protected either by removal, randomization, and replacement. And we believe that as we start using more and more digital sensors, we'll be acquiring more and more data sets. And in order to eliminate the dichotomy between data privacy and utility, we can use one of these principles to build next generation data-driven platforms. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks so much. That brings, I think, to the end of our 5 presentations today. Now we've got time for some questions. If anyone has any questions they want to send into the chat on the live stream, either YouTube or Billy, please do so. I know there are a few questions that are lined. Maybe I could just get things going by asking a few questions. I'm actually and we also have Ryan here, who is an architect by training. My first question actually is really on behalf of architects, in the sense that I know that MIT Media Lab is part of the School of Architecture. The question is how many architects, what percentage in the Media Lab of researchers in the Media Lab come from an architectural background? Just as a rough average, it'd be kind of interesting to know.
Sorry, it's a bit noisy here. I would say maximum 10 to 15%.
Okay, so not so many. Another question, which is kind of like it always, but kind of like it occurs to me when I'm thinking about the Media Lab. I mean, so on the one hand, you guys are developing advanced technologies. On the other hand, design is somehow part of what you're doing. And of course, the word design means different things in different sort of contexts. Do you guys ever see there some kind of tension developing between the kind of what things look like as a designed object that hopefully looks beautiful and the kind of the technological drive? I'm struck because I know people who design chips, for example, working in tech industries, that for whom it's really not a question of what it looks like; it's a question of how it works. Is that a tension that you guys see, or those who come from a design background? Maybe that's to be the question. Is that a tension that you see in the work that's going on?
I think that definitely is part of the thing as well. It should not only work, but also be beautiful and also bring pleasant, right? And I think I would rather refer on the one article, or say one theory that Neri Oxman has put to the public side. So she has put it in like a 4-dimensional thing. So basically, the technology, the science, the arts, as well as the design should work together. So Media Lab, I believe, is really truly want to bring people from different backgrounds and to work together. But that doesn't mean it's exactly the same for each research group. And of course, some might focus a bit more on design or aesthetics than others. But in general, I think it's a big into the vein of Media Lab to always consider that and take a good practice on that as well.
Yeah, but I mean, just to maybe bring up Neri's name again, because I mean, she's somebody that we have always associated with the Media Lab, and of course, she's no longer part of it. But what was interesting was our last session was with ICD Stuttgart, and actually, when I was teaching at the AA, both Neri and Akim were both students, and of course, when he graduated, Akim Akim taught Neri, and it's kind of interesting to see the two trajectories. I was particularly struck by Jack's work, which was very similar to some of the work going on by Dylan Wood, and actually Dylan was one of my students too, and Tiffany Cheng with the kind of material behaviors. It's very, very striking. Is there any kind of connection with ICD at all, or is that just you collaborate with a number of different institutions? Do you collaborate with ICD in any way?
Probably maybe in other groups, but not in the groups I'm in, City Science for now. But I think I'm just like in one of the groups. So we have 25 to 30 groups. So it's very hard to say. Maybe probably there will be some, but not as I know of.
I guess that you're competitors in some senses. I mean, I can imagine.
Exactly. I think we actually welcome collaboration way more than competition, because in academic it's great, and as you said, like a lot of them are all your students, so they definitely should collaborate more than compete. It's amazing.
Maybe I could ask another general question on the part of maybe architects who might be interested in applying to MIT Media Lab. How does it work? Do you apply to the Media Lab as a whole, or do you apply to specific groups within the Media Lab?
Good question. Actually, I applied. So when you apply for Media Lab, you have they will give you like 3 choices. Like you will need to choose 3 research group as your first 3 choice, and it's ordered. So like 1, choice 1, choice 2, choice 3, and all the 3. The director and probably with the help of the some researchers and students as well will look at all the applications that applied for the group. So it's very much research group driven, City Science was my first choice, and I was accepted. But there's also a chance that you choose 3. But you are accepted by another group. When the director think, sorry, we don't. It might not be a good fit for our group, but it might be a good fit for other group. They will refer you to another group. That's how it works. So it's not like a dead written rules, but you can start with 3 choice.
Just for clarification, for those that are thinking of applying to the Media, what time of year is the application deadline?
Oh, Chen's actually know way better than me. He is applying this year, right?
Application deadline is always the first day of the December, I think.
Okay.
And maybe something I could chime in there is that if people are interested in applying to the Media Lab or in eventually doing the research in the Media Lab, you can also apply to other departments and then affiliate yourself with a group in the Media Lab, which is what I did. I entered in the Institute for Data Systems and Society, where I work with human dynamics.
Maybe, Bernardo, I can ask you a question while you're on. You were talking about LA, and I'm actually based in LA right now. One thing I missed this, but I mean, one thing that really characterizes LA are the food trucks. I mean, they are very, very popular, especially outside universities over lunchtime and things. They move around, obviously, and famously, of course, I'm not quite sure if he qualified as being fast food, but famously, an architect has bought one of these vans and turned it into an ice cream place and calls it Koolhaas and goes around selling ice creams, which Koolhaas, for those of you who don't know, Rem Koolhaas is an architect, and this is spelt Koolhaus, I think it is, Koolhaas, and they sell ice creams such as Frank Berry, which is clearly kind of based on Frank Gehry, who of course famously or infamously designed a building for MIT that's been problematic in some ways. But did you accommodate? Did I miss something, or did you accommodate food trucks? Because that seems to be the most significant part of fast food industry in LA.
So for now, we used a database we have from Foursquare, and the people at the USC manually classified the outlets between fast food and low nutritional content or the rest. So we did not make a special category for fast food, but I think that the point you bring up is very, very interesting also as policies one can make, right? Because maybe it is hard to change the zoning policies from one day to the other, but actually bringing options that are mobile, like food trucks, but that are also healthy, could be a faster way to address this problem.
Yeah, I guess there are also some illegal fast food things. I live on Venice Beach, and they're on the boardwalk there. There are a lot of people kind of operating who are kind of maybe wouldn't be technically officially there, but there are all sorts of things happening there. So yeah. So we have some other questions that are coming in. Bavleen has a question, and I'd like to maybe ask Bavleen if she'd like to ask her question. Bavleen is on our Digital Future.
Yeah. Hi guys. I have two questions. One is for Naroa. I was just wondering that how do you see your project on the autonomous shared bicycle integrate in an existing built urban fabric? So maybe also talking about hyperdense cities, right, around the globe. That is the first part of my question. The second would be, how do you plan to take this ahead and engage with the citizens, maybe to contribute into the mobility data, which you spoke about, with the lack of mobility data? Do you think that your project somehow kind of tackles that situation as well? Have you considered it in your project at any point?
Yeah, so I think like for the first question, I think this is one of the main challenges that we have at the Media, that we don't do projects that would work like in 2 years. It's like if I'm working on a project that would work like right now, it's like we are not looking far enough into the future. So there is always like, we think of a technology that worked maybe like in 10 years, and then there is obviously like this gap from how the cities are right now to our vision of future cities that would be composed of walkable districts. So it's like we are designing mobility systems already for future cities. So the idea is not that we could just like throw these autonomous bicycles in New York City right now. We should already have like the infrastructure that would be needed for this. So for example, we are imagining a future where we wouldn't have cars in cities. So we would have the roads available to build the bike lanes, and maybe like the rest of the road could be used for other purposes in cities. So it's like there is like many steps that would have to happen, like in terms also of infrastructure that would support autonomy. Ideally, we wouldn't have like vehicles that have to compute everything. In the city, like there would be like a lot of support from the city. If every vehicle is going to be shared and autonomous, the infrastructure is going to help a lot with the computational weight, and then the vehicles don't have to be so intelligent. So there is like many steps in this direction, but somehow it's like we throw this idea that is like 15 years or 10 into the future, and then there has to be like a set of transformations in the infrastructure. And as for the mobility data, there was also like another question in the chat that was related to the data. For now, like the simulations that we have done are based on open data. And we have conducted interviews with scooter operators or bike sharing operators. But the data that we have used, for example, like Blue Bikes has all the data available online. So they have like very comprehensive data sets where you have like the data, like the time when a trip started, the station, where it started from, and so on. So there is very good available data set, usually on station-based bike-sharing systems because they're usually publicly operated, but then it's very challenging to get data on dockless systems because, as I said, it is a very competitive market. So usually the operators are not so open to share the data. And also, like another question that was in the chat related to the data is if we are applying also this study to other cities, and we haven't for now. But what we have done is like to build a model in a way that it's very easy to change the input files. So you would need basically like the shape files of the roads for a new city and the demand for that city, and then you could run the model for a different scenario. So we haven't, but we set up the tool so that it is easy to do this.
Yeah. I think there are a couple of questions for you in the chat. So Neil, if you don't mind, should I kind of take these questions to her? Yeah, okay. So I think another question which kind of comes up is, what are the major problems that your group is tackling? I think it's quite open also to the city science group, and if you want to maybe address it with your topic in view.
So I think the way, like in the sense of what are like the main urban problems that we are trying to solve, like I would say that we start from the urban design. So in our group, like we have more than 10% of architects. Maybe we have more like 70. Correct me if I am wrong, Ryan. But so the way that we think of mobility is like starting from the urban design. What is going to be an urban design that will foster innovation? How can we design these districts so that they are like livable, entrepreneurial, dense, diverse? So that's like the first thing that we think about. So that's why we have like this vision of walkable districts that are going to be like very high performance, and somehow like the three key points of having high density, having good accessibility, and having proximity. So those are like the three main chunks, and the different research lines are related to these three challenges. So I guess like that's the main thing that we think about, like from the urban perspective, what is the most efficient city design going to be, and then what are the technologies that we need to implement this vision. So in sense of like in terms of mobility, it's like we are designing mobility for a very specific future city. So it's like we designed it for this.
Is there anything else on the same question if any of the fellow teammates and researchers would like to add? Okay. I think, Neil, you want to take over?
Yeah, I think the kind of question, what's interesting to my mind is that we have as architects always struggle in defining who we are. I mean, I think it's increasingly now, I think the profession may be limited to buildings largely, but not totally, whereas the discipline, the academic discipline, is really just spreading out all over the place. And I certainly know that Jack's work, I thought, which was really interesting actually, was very, I was one of the guest editors of an AD on what we called 3D printed body architecture. And we noticed that, all the people who are working for Iris van Herpen, people like Neri and others, there's a whole group of architects who are 3D printing outfits for her. They actually have an architectural background, and I think what we are as architects is kind of being renegotiated right now. So we're in the kind of somewhere in between situation. But there's a question in the chat for Jack from someone called Russian Wu. Jack's projects are really impressive. May I ask how long do all the projects? Sorry, I can't read it. May I ask how long all the projects take to be developed, and how do you get the inspiration?
Thank you for the question and also the kind words. The projects and their source of inspiration, generally the projects will go on for about a year or sometimes 2 years. And the inspiration for these projects often comes with kind of befriending a material or befriending a material process and letting the material talk to you. So in the case of the 3D printed fabric, I was just sitting with a 3D printer at like 2 a.m. trying to do some weird stuff with the printing and noticing that there were these gaps emerging. And just by like continuing to see like, oh, this is curious. I wonder if I can control it so that it's really even over the surface, or I wonder if I can like create a 3D shape with it. And then I started realizing like, oh, this is actually like a textile, or this could be a textile. And then it was like, okay, well, what's everything that we can do with this basic technique? But it was really from a bottom up standpoint. I didn't come from the perspective of like, I want to 3D print fabrics. It more just came of like, oh, here's this interesting quirk that I found that I can exploit and use. And so really, whenever I start a new project, it generally starts with the material before it starts with a specific goal. So I'll like read papers and be like, ooh, seems like a cool hydrogel material, maybe. And then I'll start working with it. And then just with the hands-on inspiration, then the ideas come just from that. But yeah, thank you for the question.
Yeah, Jack, just to follow up from that, I mean, so when you're working, I mean, you call them groups rather than labs. When you work in a particular group, how much freedom do you have to do those kind of things, to open up into areas of exploration, or do you have to predefine what you're going to address and according to the agenda of the particular group, or is it a negotiation between the two?
It's a good question. It's generally a lot of freedom. I think that the thing that you have to prove is like, is this like, okay, you found this interesting behavior. Is this something that you could actually like create a compelling like publication from? But generally it's the students are admitted to the group because the things that they're interested in are with like kind of effortlessly aligned with the group. So my PI kind of lets us do our thing and supports us with like what we personally find interesting.
Yeah, maybe just one more general question on the same kind of topic in terms of the sponsors for the Media Lab. I mean, this is something I know the answer for, but it's one in terms of I think our audience would be useful. And that is to say, how much do your sponsors define what the area of research is, or do they give you a certain freedom in each group to go and pursue your own particular agenda?
It depends. In my experience, it's and I remember hearing this when one professor was talking about the Media Lab, but it's less of them telling us what they want and more of us telling them what they should want and being like, hey, like we have this like crazy new technique to create like shape changing cars. And then like we bring the idea to them, convince them to support it. And then that's, at least in my experience, how the relationship works is, and so it's kind of, and sometimes you adapt or modify a project or an application from it to suit a specific sponsor's like particular interest within the project. But generally it's us bringing solutions to problems that they didn't realize existed.
Just to follow up from that, does that mean that the sponsors have the first option on ideas that you've developed? And yeah.
So they have the first, they get like, the sponsors get 2 years of first dibs on any projects that come from, or any IP that's produced in the lab. But they can kind of, just through Members Week, every year we have a bunch of member companies come and visit the lab and we all demo for them, and these are returning in person. And so that's just like a way to like really naturally start like collaborative discussions. I would say most relationships with member companies are collaborative, where both sides are meeting each other somewhere in some middle. And but it does depend on the project, and it also depends on the group.
Thanks, Jack. Gustavo has a question he'd like to ask. So maybe Gustavo, you'd like to ask a question.
Sure. Thank you very much, everyone. The question is more specific to, well, there's two. Thank you, Naroa, for your presentation. I had a bunch of questions with you, but specifically, what are your roles or responsibilities as researchers now in looking at speculative futures? So my question specifically is, if you're looking at research 10 to 20 years into the future, how do you triangulate and think about policy, law, and societal responsibilities when you make? And a follow-up is, how do you balance the science and the humanities, so ethics, and also your pursuit of knowledge? So that would be kind of a two-part question. Anyone?
Yes, I'm happy to start, but I think others can also like contribute, because I think this is like a very open question and it's difficult to answer. I think one of the ways that we're trying to, like, even if we develop technologies for the future, I think that's why it's not, for example, like in the case that of my presentation, that we develop the vehicles and that's it, and we close the project. We're also like conducting simulations to understand the fleet performance. We are also trying to assess the environmental impacts and so on and so forth, right? So I think it's very important to both conduct these studies, but also we are trying to get the tools ready so that we can keep reevaluating these studies as the future changes, right? So for example, like I can have the simulation and run it with the roadmap from today, but with the roads that Boston has today. But then as the city changes, and for example, like we can run the simulations again. So the tools that we develop, I think they have to have the flexibility of being adapted through time. So that, and as I was saying, like the studies that we do, like they have a lot of uncertainty because like it's early technology, but then as the technology evolves and the society evolves, like we gain certainty in these variables. So so it's important, I think, also for us to keep updating our studies as we move forward. But just as a thought, I don't know if others want to share their ideas on this.
Sorry for the open-ended question. I think mostly when you think about the MIT, you think about the kind of the power and the privilege of you proposing projects globally and other people dreaming about thinking through this technology. So I would love to hear about others, about how do you think about science and the ethical use of science when it comes to these products. So it's great to have an autonomous bicycle, but if there's tens of thousands of them in the dumpster because the company goes bankrupt, then what is your responsibility there? And I'm sure there is some, but what do you guys think?
So I think, again, like this is why we are like conducting studies of how this future will be. But for example, like you were also asking about what would be like the political implications, the governance. So it's like we can't assess those things. Like I don't know how political systems will be in 15 years, right? So I think we always have to consider that uncertainty into our studies. And I think like the only thing that we can do in that sense is like try to analyze like broad sets of scenarios. Like when there is uncertainty, the best way to cope with it is like to have different what if scenarios. And I think it is our responsibility to invest as much time as possible in doing those broader scenarios. And then, as I said, whenever we have more data and things become more certain, to reevaluate our studies and say like, look, we thought this would be a very good option, but maybe we even get to do like a pilot test in this city, and then we see that, oh, there are like these problems that we didn't foresee. So then we should take that learning, integrate it in our studies, and reevaluate the impacts. So for sure, we wouldn't say like, just as I said, we wouldn't be like throwing these vehicles into a city just without further evaluating. So I think it's like very incremental, the way that they would be developed, and also like this allows us to refine our hypothesis. And if something doesn't work, and in 5 years I say like, look, this idea of the autonomous bicycles, it wasn't right because the future has led us in this direction, and then it's not the adequate mobility solution for future cities, and that's it. And we would close the project and start with another thing. So I think that's also like part of the identity of the Media Lab, that we are just open to say like, look, so we weren't right about this. Let's rethink all of these ideas.
Yeah, I wanted to add there. I completely agree with Naroa. I think that the Media Lab, what she's saying is completely true, and somehow the Media Lab is amazing because we have the opportunity to think outside of the box, to try to think how the future will be. But with that, as Gustavo notes, and as Naroa has said, the things can go wrong, and we need to think about many implications, and sometimes we can't. And something I wanted to add there is that I think a very good tool is always being very, very sincere and honest on what are the limitations of your research, what things you haven't looked at because you don't have time, and or because you are looking for collaborators who are more suitable to find implications in different groups. And I think that it's as long as you keep this honesty and this sincerity, it's easy to, or you will eventually run into this, oh, it was a bad idea, as Naroa said.
And to add on to it, I think one of the really nice aspects of being in the lab is that we're not siloed in one discipline where we're receiving critiques in one discipline, or maybe we're trying to make a battery and we're being critiqued on the power density of our battery. But in the Media Lab, we're able to get advice from completely different realms. Well, like an art student saying like, oh, but like, will this create landfills one day? Or someone in the prosthetics lab saying, oh, like, could you make it flexible so that we can have it like better fit to the body? But you're able to get these critiques from just completely different perspectives. And I think that it's really important that like us, the students are really open to hearing, well, one, making space to receive that feedback, and also to like integrate them into our practices. I think that just the conversation within cohorts is a really like valuable thing to make sure that there's nothing that we could have thought about earlier in the project that we then realize very late in the project.
Also wanted to add one point building upon Jack's argument. So I think being in the Media Lab and working with sponsors gives us a good reality check, and also collaborating with multiple people from different diverse backgrounds also helps just in like explaining what I'm working on or what our group is working on to others. Gives us a good point to like see if we are working in some extremely hypothetical world, or is it like something grounded in reality as well.
And also, I just want to add to what Jack and Yan said earlier. So like in Media Lab, Neri Oxman mentioned like the 4 pillars: science, engineering, design, and arts. If I remember correctly, she mentioned that for science, it's like we're trying to understand how the world works, what is the mechanism behind the world, how do we explain the phenomenon. And then in engineering, it's like we are making it, we are implementing a solution to the problem in the world. And then for design, it's like, oh, we are repurposing the questions. We are trying to ask a different question, and then how do we think about something? How do we imagine something? And then for arts, it's like we're challenging the hidden assumptions, presumptions of the world. So I feel like when we have all these 4 like pillars or disciplines together, like interwoven into like all aspects of our research, they are like check and balance, and they also reinforce each other. And yeah.
Maybe I could just ask a question in terms of the future. When I was teaching at GSD, I invited Sputniko, Hiromi Asaki, to come and give a performance. Is there, and she was for a while was part of the Media Lab. She's since left. Is anyone looking at speculative design in that kind of way, design fictions anymore, or is that finished? I guess not. Okay.
You know in which group that work was?
She had her own group. She had her own group. But I think she was there 2014 to 2017, so not so long. We've got a question in the chat from Giovanna Pilaco, who's one of our Digital Futures team. Is there a role in your research about ancestral knowledge to improve in a step or process? Do you use ancestral knowledge or historical knowledge? Maybe not. Okay.
Neil, let me follow up a little bit. Well, I think we all come from the Digital Futures Project is a global project, and I've met so many people from different cultures, languages, and belief systems. I think the question gets down to the core. I mean, does your background, family knowledge, community knowledge, how does that affect your search for truth and the creation of knowledge and community building?
So I can add a few points here. So as you guys saw, my research is around data privacy. And I come from India, where in comparison to United States, the privacy regulations are not as stringent. So it was very interesting, and as well as I would say enlightening in a certain way for my research to account for the fact that data privacy is contextual based on your region, for example. So what laws and what regulations are people asking about right now varies from region, and what they will ask in future also varies on how these societies evolve. And it seems like as societies are evolving more and more and relying upon more and more on digital data, the need to address data privacy and also the need to build regulations which can account for those, let's say, data privacy violation comes into more effect. And that's something we have been trying to account in our, let's say, broader framework of data privacy.
Maybe I could just follow up with a question for you, Abhishek, since you're working on well, actually maybe it's for the whole group. In fact, we on tomorrow we have a session on AI and architecture. We had last week when you heard also talking about the tools she's using AI and architecture. I know that CitySense is using tools to kind of analyze urban space and so on. Is anyone there working on generative techniques using AI for architecture itself?
Not sure about the specific application in architecture, but definitely we have developed several generative techniques as well. And one of interesting problem which has been emerging lately in generative modeling is that how do you use these generative techniques when you do not have access to the raw data? And that's like one of the things we have been solving lately. And another similar problem, which is on the same line, is that sometimes data is super heterogeneous, which is like, let's say if we are collecting data from different individuals across different geographic regions and different demographics, turns out many of these generative techniques do not actually work. And how do we improve in them in a way where they can account for this heterogeneous world is like one of the challenge. Turns out similar to the challenge of privacy to a certain extent, which we are also solving. But yeah, I'll let others if there's any architecture application.
Yeah, maybe Ryan. I don't know whether you want to say something.
Yeah, I had work on some projects not exactly on architecture like buildings, but on the on the city, the form of the city, as well as the zoning of the city, if that fits your question. So basically, what we did is do a lot of urban data analysis, as well as urban simulations, like performance simulation, including traffic, including sunlight, including noise, including economics as well, because the zoning is about FAR, how much you can build and what's the rental and price implication. So, but it's all about decision making, like how collectively multiple parties can decide together. So we tackle it in two means. One is using AI as well to not only optimize the performance, but also giving suggestions in the real time to give a user better, more informed suggestions, so that when they make a decision, it's much more effective and they can achieve their goal together much faster. That's one application. And I think there a chance you can chip in while you are working on the vertical city project. So yeah, although I know it just started, but any plans to incorporate AI as well?
I and Forman are working on a new project about the generation of the vertical city. It's like talking about the functions, the form, how can they be generated by some genetic algorithm, evaluation algorithm, and we define some metrics to evaluation the results of the generation. And the major difference from this and the previous work that we are talking more about the vertical dimension, about how amenities can distribute it in a building and how they can be optimized. And we are talking this in a context that in the future. So there are like no limitation, not so fixed the limitation like the form of the building. They can be more creatively imagined. So yeah, but it's only just like at the start stage, and we are doing by iterations. And the first display of this work should be our next month's members week. We will show some our progress, and welcome everyone to come for check out.
Thanks, Charles. We've got a very practical question in the chat. I mean, this is a very useful session. Thank you so much, guys. It's really in terms of answering lots of people's questions. So it's from someone called Huili. There are two questions. How do you prepare for your three chances, for your three choices when you apply? Do you have to prepare a proposal or a statement for them? And then he says, what kind of background can students join with? Is it possible to get into the Media Lab with an arts background and with little coding practices? I don't know if anyone wants to ask that. Also, I think maybe the other related question.
I can answer some of that. I thought that it was for Li Hui. No, but it's okay. Anyone can chip in. I think I've been in the lab for, I don't know, 7 years. So it's a bit outdated. So please refer to the latest information as well. But there are a bunch of questions. So yes, you do write a statement. I mean, it's your choice to write a statement for all three choices, or you can do it separately for each. And I recommend you do that, so that you give enough attention and as well as like a context and relevance to that. Basically, you will talk about
what's your background? Why are you interested, right? And what could you contribute? And your thoughts and philosophy about the group's topic. In terms of what was the other question? Sorry, if you can remind me a little bit.
Art's background.
Background. I think it mainly depends on the group, and as far as I know, there are quite some who has been accepted with art background or without coding background. That's completely normal. But since the technology part is very important, so you do see like more than half of them has a bit science and computer science background, maybe have some coding. But if you can demonstrate, you can learn first. That's okay as well. So that's so definitely yes, you can be without a background. But the more important thing is if your background, your interest fit the overall idea of the group you're applying.
Maybe I could just ask the follow-up question. This is just a very practical question. I think I know the answer for this, but I just want to ask it again. I know that when Neri applied to the Media Lab, she actually was unusual and she got straight into the PhD program, but most have to go through the master's program first. At least that was the case then. Is that still the case? You have to do a master's there before you get into a PhD slot?
Yes, it is still the case, unless it's really rare like Neri. And also Neri was not in Media Lab system, I guess, but in MIT system. So that somehow can count a bit. So basically, if you can apply for a PhD, I mean, there might be a slim chance that you can get PhD directly, but most of them will be direct to the master program. And also there's something called fast track. So if your background is strong enough, you can chat with the director you're applying, I mean the director of the group, and saying that I'm very sure that I will do the PhD. So chances are, if you know the funding, you know the skill set, everything fits, you could do a master and a PhD in 5 years. Yeah, and you probably don't need to write a master thesis. So basically, it's like a 5-year PhD. But I didn't do that because I wasn't that clear at that time.
I did go through that program through the fast track, and you also have to have a master's degree in a related field to be able to apply for the fast track. And still you have to do the first year of the master's. So I don't know of anyone that got directly into the PhD. So even if you have a master's, you have to do the first year, and then you can apply for the fast track in case you have a master's in a related field. And then you don't do the second year of the master's, so you don't do the thesis, but also you don't get the master's degree. So you go directly into the PhD program on the second year. But that's something that you have to apply, and then the process is a little bit different than for the regular PhD application.
And the one thing to add here is the number of years here is not absolute at all. It could be rarely be shorter than that, but it could be longer than that as well. Yeah, quite some will be longer because it's a really privilege to be in such a free environment, with all the peers to be have so much diverse background, and yeah.
So just to follow up, I mean, so Neri actually, although she was teaching at the Media Lab and had a post there, I think she did her PhD in MIT in the computation group with Neri, with Terry Knight, right? Is that correct?
I don't know exactly, but could be. Yeah, there was also collaboration with other departments. So it could be complicated. So, and in principle, I think, yeah, I think the guideline in principle is that they try to see your success and will give you as much of the freedom as possible, but of course with certain criteria and with the consensus of the staff and advisors to be so that you are qualified, and also it also fits the motto, one of the mottos of Media Lab, that is you don't need a permission to do something, just do it.
Okay, I think we should be trying to wrap things up now. This is a session that could go on for forever, and I think there are lots of questions that have been that people will have. I think very useful to be able to get some insights into the thing. I mean, I often think that I think about the MIT Media Lab a bit like AI. Everyone uses the term, but nobody really knows what it means. And I think to actually get some insights today into what you guys are doing is incredibly useful. We've all heard of the Media Lab, but as a kind of brand name, shall we say, but to actually get some hands-on experience and some stories about what's going on there has an incredible insight. So, I thank you so much for this.
Neil, before we go, are there any final thoughts from any of the panelists? Do you guys want to share anything before we go? Because there are a lot of people that look up to MIT as a leader in the world for research. Do you want to give hope to someone who in South America, Africa, anywhere in the world?
Something I could say is just the Media Lab, I think, is a very special place because many of the people I know there got there by doing what they love and what they really enjoy. And even if that at first didn't seem to be something that would take them to a graduate degree or to the Media Lab or whatever, it wind up taking them because all the things you discover when you start doing what you like. So that's what I would say. Just keep doing what you think what you have loved doing so far, and things get arranged when you do that.
So follow your passion is your message, yeah. Anyway, this is a session. I mean, I get the feeling this is the beginning of a discussion, not the end of one. So we'll maybe carry on. But this has been fantastic, guys. Really interesting work. I think incredibly. This Insider series was intended to precisely give people that, precisely have a look inside MIT Media Lab and see exactly what's going on. So it's been incredibly useful. So I'd like to thank you for that. Maybe we can put up the slides just for the final to wrap up just quickly. So just a reminder that tomorrow we have Daniel Bolajan, who is an architect working in the area of AI. One of probably the best in the world, to my view. He's really very talented. I just want to point out the timing that is. It's going to be at 3 o'clock in Central and Eastern European time, 10 o'clock in China, because the clocks change tomorrow. We actually have a bit crazy because in 2 weeks later the clocks change in Europe. But for tomorrow, 3 o'clock in Central Europe and 10 o'clock in China, and this is part of a series that. Has been going on every week, and last week you'll find Wan Yu He presenting on AI and architecture as well, and we've got several more to go. And then also this week we have a session in Spanish, which we're very proud of. That's going to be on the 18th of March, and then also on the 19th of March we have both a tutorial from Runjia Chan, who's from your rivals down the road who studied at GSD, and following on from Runjia Chan's thing, and you can see the link there to if you want to sign up. You can do a screen capture on that and apply that way. Also, we have our first ever Portuguese session, which is really going to be amazing. Mariana from Zaha's office, who's Portuguese, and also some teams from Brazil. This is a new chapter for us, and we were very excited about this. It's all our different language channels. And then finally, we have and everything is uploaded on here, including today's session. If you want to go and see it again. the address is at the bottom, the YouTube address, Digital Futures World there. And then finally, we if anybody would like to come and join us, we are looking for some new recruits. It'd be great to have some from MIT Media Lab especially for the summer when we're going to launch a series of workshops. It would be great to have you come and join us. And we have our Discord community there as well. If you'd like to come and join our chat on Discord. So I just want to finish off by thanking you once more. This has been, just what I was hoping to get, some insights, from very personal insights about what your concerns are, and some really, really very good work. I'll leave it up to the viewers to decide which is the best place in the world for doctoral research. We want to follow up with a few more institutions in the next few months, so it won't be the last of the series. But we had ICD last month, and the media obviously today. Really fascinating insights. So thank you all for your help. Thank you for your contributions. Thank you to Chance and Ryan for helping to set this up, and thank you as ever to the Digital Futures team working behind the scenes to make this happen. We're all volunteers. We're all doing this out of our love and passion for the subject, and I hope that you're all appreciating this. And thank you so much, everybody. And so tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock EST, we will be having a session with Daniel Bolajan. Thank you, everybody, and see you all again soon. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Amazing time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. So.
Thank you.
Thank you.